Lord of the Oasis. Chapter 321, The New Sun Disk. The dinner was ready before evening. The long table in the council hall was piled up with a variety of meats and wild forest fruits, crispy toasted bread, and condiments made from various spices used as dipping sauces. Freshly roasted antelope meat, roasted wild boar ribs, roasted bison hind. Fatty fried fish, stewed wild pigeon with cabbage, cooked fruit dessert wrapped in date palm sugar. Boiled eggs, fried chicken, and fried crispy bee pupae. Plus, a barrel of malt liquor that had been chilled in the underground river. The feast was extremely sumptuous. The town spent all their efforts to make the food, in the hope that Kant, the Supreme Lord, would enjoy it. The taste of the food was excellent, and Kant was extremely satisfied. He did not skimp on his praises at the banquet. The long period of dealing with all kinds of problems and the long journey to various places had made Kant a little exhausted. Although he took a rest midway, he merely had a short nap before getting busy again. The matter was urgent, and Kant was unable to hold himself back from the busy pace. But it also represented the proper development and safety of his territories. But it was different now. The stone pass had been taken down, and the gate of the dukedom of Leo had been opened. His troops could easily pass through the most important canyon in the Sinway range and enter the country that had once ostracized him. They would attack as aggressively as fire and hold their position as steadily as a mountain. This was how Kant's current situation could be described. Under the attack of Kant's elite troops, no one in the North County would be able to withstand it. Even if the nobles of the South County and the East County were to join forces, Kant would be fearless in a head-on battle with them. With an astonishing number of extraordinary knights leading the heavy cavalries, Kant had the power to defeat tens of thousands of troops. Kant was definitely the one who lagged behind in terms of the number of heavy cavalries. But in terms of the quality of the cavalry, and even in terms of the number of superior combat forces, it could be said that Kant was at the top of the entire dukedom of Leo. Moreover, a new route had been found. He could even use a faster and more convenient waterway that led directly to the banks of the Resnistican River in the East County, and it was the best place to attack the dukedom of Leo. That was the Resnistican River, where trade was more prosperous, and the river carried gold eagles and silver coins. Kant definitely would not give it up. There was also a spy that he had prepared beforehand. However, he did not expect that the spy happened to be located in the local area. If Kant used Borg, the heir of the bankrupt merchant family, his power would develop faster than that of the northern county. He would also obtain more profits. One had to know that the North County was a poor and cold place, which resulted in the low strength of the noble families. The prosperous lands of the dukedom of Leo were located at North and South counties. As for Kant, he planned to control the East County. His power spread out in the dark, and with the help of the military of the North County, when he had accumulated enough power, he could immediately take advantage of the situation and merge the Southwest and Southern territories, then attacked the South County and obtaining the final victory. No one could have imagined that a poor little baron was trapped in the Naran desert and unable to develop his strength, who was locked up in the North County and unable to spread out his force, would suddenly show at the East County, and combined with the huge military strength of the Northern County, he would directly break through the South County, and completely conquered the dukedom of Leo. Such a terrifying strategic plan. As for the sky veil of death, Kant narrowed his eyes slightly. From the looks of it, with the spring of nature, he could at least withstand it. However, consuming the precious spring of nature was not something he was happy to see. This kind of spring water could speed up the growth of plants, and it was the most direct help to agriculture and animal husbandry. It could be said that Kant could use this batch of spring water in his hands could completely double the size of the Oasis lookout if he wanted to. It was twice the size of the entire area. As long as they found the desert poplar tree, red willow, and other tree species that could live in the desert, they could harvest its seeds or branches, bring in the spring water, and after simple soilless cultivation, sprinkle these springs of nature. A single drop of spring water could achieve a terrifying effect of accelerating the growth of crops for a day, and it could easily exchange for a small forest to grow. Sprinkle some soil from the Seenway range, together with the shade of the trees and the water channels, let the vegetation grow. The simplest oasis was formed in this way. As long as it was strictly guarded, the oasis would form a good cycle in a few years. Under deliberate care and without destruction, it would become one with the oasis lookout and become a real oasis. The spring of nature certainly played the greatest role. It could not be easily consumed in the sky veil of death. This was Kant's idea. He hoped that the mages could develop new spells and modification with their knowledge, forming a foundation that could resist the sky veil of death in exchange for a space for Kant to develop. At least, according to the mages' speculation, the research would not be too difficult. The spells in this world were not difficult to understand. It was just that with the end of the era of the ancient gods, the elemental energy tide was in a declining status, which was also the end of the magic era. As a result, the effects of spells became worse. However, as the natives of the Wind of War and outsiders of this world, the foundation of their spells was the result of thousands of years of research by the Unfoth Empire. Naturally, the phenomenon of the decline of magic in this world did not affect their powers. Although their spells were also weakened, they had richer knowledge. At the very least, it was very difficult to become an official mage in the end of magic era. Kant now had 18 official mages. The banquet ended. After a pleasant chat with James and Boonduck, they went to their room and rest in the night. However, at the corner of the second floor of the council hall, there was golden light flashing in the night from time to time. It was like the sun releasing light, but it stopped, like a light bulb that was turned off from time to time. The surrounding soldiers who acted as guards also looked over curiously. No one went forward to disturb them. Boonduck had already instructed that the mages were conducting experiments, and no one was allowed to disturb them. However, the golden light that appeared from time to time at night was still very sensitive, and it even attracted many demonized creatures. However, before they could get close to the city wall, they were shot into hedgehogs by the heavily guarded Ravenstern Rangers and wardens on the city wall. With the help of the city defense, even the savaged demonized creatures would become corpses. Unfortunately, the flesh of the demonized creatures could not be used as food. This was the only shame. When Kant woke up the next day, he pushed open the door and heard cheers and laughter coming from the room beside the corridor. He frowned slightly. He was just about to walk over when the door on the other side was opened, and the mages rushed out. Each of them had dark circles under their eyes. They looked like they had not slept the whole night, but apparently they were extremely excited. "Long live my lord! We've succeeded! My lord! We've succeeded! We've succeeded! Long live my lord! Long live my lord!" The mages immediately cheered when they saw Kant. "Stop, gentlemen!" Kant reached out his hand to signal for silence. Looking at the mages whose eyes were filled with thrill, Kant's heart moved slightly, and the corners of his mouth curled up. It seems that a joyous event worthy of celebration has occurred. Who can explain the situation? "My lord, it's like this." The mages quieted down, and the leader of mages said respectfully, "Our research has succeeded. Just as expected." Kant's pupils contracted slightly. And the mage captain continued to report, "We have already successfully analyzed the magic patterns within the two sun disks. We have to praise the ancient times, the ingenious ideas of those gods' descendants. If it wasn't for the existence of the knowledge of the Unfoth Empire, we probably wouldn't have been able to successfully analyze them." Kant nodded and asked in a slightly urgent tone, "You guys did a good job. What about the results of your analysis? Can you effectively resist the sky veil of death of the undead?" "No problem." The mage leader immediately nodded firmly. "Absolutely." Kant calmed his mind and said, "Let me see the results." Seeing is believing. Now, even though he believed what the mages said, he still wanted to see what kind of research results they had obtained after analyzing the sun disk. They dared to boast so confidently that they could resist the sky veil of death of the undead. "This is very simple," the mage replied and gestured to the room at the same time. "I'm looking forward to it." Kant walked into the room where the mages had studied for the entire night. However, just as he entered the room, he paused for a moment, and a look of astonishment appeared in his eyes. This Kant could not help but mutter. "This is the result of our research, an effective way to sky veil of death." The mages' voices were filled with pride and self-satisfaction as they looked at Kant's shocked expression. They puffed out their chests and raised their heads as they explained, "The power of the ancient gods has been deciphered by our knowledge from the Unfoth Empire. Although what we are doing is actually a poor imitation, as time passes, it will gradually be perfected." "This is very good, very good." Kant took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "You guys did a great job." Right in front of Kant, an even bigger sun disk was suspended half a meter above the floor. That's right, it was floating and became even bigger. The original diameter of the sun disk was about half a meter, but now it had grown to 1 meter. And this golden sun disk was still emitting a faint golden light, just like two suns, slowly releasing rings of golden halos, as well as a sacred feeling that made people fear. There was also an even purer golden stream of light flowing within the sacred inscriptions on the sun disk, bringing with it an even purer golden glow. At this moment, a dialog box popped up on his retina. "Sun disk, under repair." This golden disk engraved with mysterious engravings faintly condenses the power of the sun. Although the mysterious engravings on it had become indistinct due to the passage of time, it had been repaired with special magic engravings and was barely repaired. It was able to display part of its former power. Special Effect 1: Temperature Control. Absorb sunlight during the day, reduce the temperature within 5,000 square meters. Release sunlight at night, raise the temperature of 5,000 square meters. Constant maximum temperature is 30 degrees. Minimum temperature is 0 degrees. Special Effect 2: Holy Light, can release holy light within a 5,000 square meter area, shining like the sun on the earth. Can resist all negative status buffs and allow wounded soldiers within the holy light area to heal. Special Effect 3: Evil Expulsion, any evil troops will not be able to approach within a 5,000 square meter area. If they approach, they will be automatically attacked by holy light attacks until the evil troops are defeated, leaving no one alive. Remark: 1. Can be placed under the sun to recharge itself. 2. Can be fused with other solar disks to strengthen its power. Chapter 322, The Final Best Plan. The sun disk was clearly visible. However, Kant was slightly stunned. He glanced at the three special effects. Each of them could be considered powerful, but they could only affect an area of 5,000 square meters, which was only equivalent to the size of a mansion. Compared to the Oasis lookout, which occupied an area of 1 hectare, the area affected by the sun disk was too small. Even if it was placed in the middle of the castle, it could only protect 1/3 of the area. The area was too small. This 5,000 square meter is not enough to protect the walls of Trondheim Castle. Thinking about the sky veil of death, which covered the sky, the area of protection is really too small. When the black fog and dark clouds of the sky veil of death swept over, they have to give up part of the defensive fortifications to protect the area successfully. As for the agriculture and animal husbandry areas in the outside world, they could not protect them at all. We have to give up. Kant would not be willing to do that. The current Trondheim Castle was dependent on the Oasis lookout for protection. Without the Oasis lookout, this seemingly strong castle is merely a landmark that could be defended. Even if it could temporarily hold off the attacks of the sky veil of death's undead, Kant would still give the order to retreat. Oasis lookout, which could no longer protect the castle, does not have much value in the Naran desert. Moreover, by then, the salt mines would have already been conquered. Without the dinar income from the table salt trade, even if this was Kant's first base, the best plan would be to retreat to the city in the Sceneway Range and defend it. This is Kant's town, Aaron. The ancient passage had waterways and land routes that lead directly to the hinterland of the Dukedom of Leo. It is extremely prosperous and provides access to several countries. It could be said to be the river of human trade, the Resnistican River. Even if the sky veil of death spreads to this town, there will still be a way out. At most, they could abandon the town. They could all go to the temple ruins at the bottom of the mountain. Even if the temple ruins could not be defended, they could still retreat along the ancient passage to the underground city of the Karst Cave. The sun disk covers an area of 5,000 square meters. It was definitely enough to directly seal off the ancient passage. Moreover, Kant could also use the waterway to travel across the Resnistican River and contact the spies he had set up. Kant still does not see the eastern county as a threat. His extraordinary ability was enough to dominate. Moreover, if the sky veil of death appeared in the Sceneway Range at that time, it would mean that the Stone Pass also produced this kind of undead strategic spell, which even the Dukedom of Leo had to pay attention to. The East County, Countess Agatha, and Kant's aunt also had to help out. When the time comes, Kant would have a better chance to develop in the East County. After all, the undead and the humans are mortal enemies. Those skeletons and zombies are the enemies of all living beings. There was no peace talks. If the Dukedom of Leo could not resist the attacks, the entire North County would surrender to the undead. The rich South County and East County would then become the front-line fighters against the undead. Even the Silver Platter Kingdom and the country that believed in the Holy Light would have to send troops to support them. After the Dukedom of Leo crosses the river, they would arrive at the Silver Platter Kingdom. These were all part of Kant's worst-case scenario. Of course, all of these were based on the premise that Kant could not resist the undead, could not resist the sky veil of death, and thus gave up on his own forces. He would retreat completely in order to develop further. The price was too high. Kant had also unintentionally blocked even more threats for the Dukedom of Leo. Whether it was the ferocious and terrifying Jack Allen Expeditionary Army or the undead disaster, Kant had become the human country's shield. He could be said to have enjoyed the helpless situation, where he had used the Stone Pass as a shield. The price of retreating is really too high. The only way is to defend. Kant clenched his fists and made up his mind. However, looking at the sun disk in front of him, he had a lot of thoughts. He turned to the mages and said in a deep voice, "Although this kind of strange object can resist the sky veil of death, the range is too small for us." The mages were unhurried, and replied, "Lord, the range can be increased." Kant frowned. "I don't understand. We need more sun disks to absorb their sacred sun pattern, and gradually fuse them together to repair them." The mages continued, "If there are no sun disks, then we need more sunlight to recharge them, and to increase the range of these sun disks. Of course, according to our calculations, absorbing an additional sun disk can increase the range by 5,000 square meters, while absorbing a year's worth of sunlight can increase the range by 1,000 square meters. The difference is really obvious." Kant scoffed and shook his head. "It shouldn't be said that the difference was obvious. The difference is in fact so big that it is equivalent to the distance between heaven and earth. The solar disk could increase the range by an additional 5,000 square meters. It could be said that as long as Kant had an extra solar disk, he could directly make this so-called divine area disk become more powerful and have a wider range. As for absorbing sunlight to recharge, it was not a source of concern for Kant. Although this is a slow process, compared to absorbing the additional solar disk, the increase in range is still lacking. It only increased by 1,000 square meters every year, 5,000 square meters Indiana 5 years, and 10,000 square meters Indiana 10 years. For Kant, who was pressed for time, with less than half a year left, it was meaningless. What Kant needs is time. But what is worth celebrating is that he happens to have 2 additional sun disks. Without communicating or waiting for the Supreme Lord's order, the mages and Kant dragged out the other sun disk, which is casted in gold, from a corner. It was a strange object that originated from the era of the ancient gods. But it was much smaller. The half-meter-long disc-shaped object did not have the ability to float in the air, nor did it emit a faint golden light. It had the invisible power of a small sun. It was similar to when it was taken from the stone platform. It also carried dust that had not been cleaned. The sacred sun pattern carried a few threads of golden light, which were faintly discernible. This proves that the object was extraordinary. When the sun disk approached the floating sun disk, both of them moved slightly. The golden light flowed rapidly within the sacred sun pattern. The sun disk that was suspended mid-air was emitting an even brighter light. It was as though it had met its partner and was overjoyed, wanting to bring it into its embrace. This was a close connection between similar strange objects. After being modified using the magical knowledge of the Unfoth Empire, it cannot be said to be the same as the previous sun disk. It can only be better. Begin the fusion. The mage captain spoke. 5 mages stood out and raised their wands together. As the mysterious magic power was displayed, a ray of golden light appeared on the 2 sun disks. It slowly circulated and fused into one. Chapter 323, Subsequent Arrangements. This was the phenomenon of the sun disk merging together. In just a few seconds, the 2 sun disks had merged into one in front of Kant. Or rather, the floating sun disk emitted golden light and absorbed the unapprised sun disk. Ding! The sun disk has been repaired. At this moment, a dialog box popped up on Kant's retina. The golden light in front of him was dazzling. After absorbing one sun disk, the sun disk that was originally floating in front of Kant became even larger. From a diameter of 1 meter, it increased to 2 meters in diameter. Its thickness also changed from half a finger to 2 fingers. The entire disk became even larger and heavier. The sacred sun pattern on the body of the golden disk became even more obvious. The golden light flowing within the pattern became even more dazzling. Very good. Kant raised his eyebrows slightly and could not help but sigh. In the description of the system's interface, the radiation range of this sun disk had really increased from 5,000 square meters to 10,000 square meters, which was double in coverage. My lord, we still have more sun disk to fuse with, the mage leader smiled. At the same time, the mage next to him dragged a new solar disk in a corner. These were found in the ruins of the underground temple. Now, these 2 solar disks were undoubtedly adding more nutrients to Kant's solar disk that was already under repair. There was nothing wrong with this description. It was nutrients. Using the other sun disks as nutrients to nourish this sun disk that had been strengthened by the magic techniques of the Unfoth Empire. As the golden light circulated again, the sun disk floating in front of him became more and more brilliant. The golden light circulated within the sacred sun pattern as if it was corporeal. The overall diameter continued to expand, transforming into a huge golden disk that was 3 meters in diameter and 5 centimeters in thickness. The golden light carried an unrivaled might. It was really like the sun that hung high in the sky, descending into this room. This is the limit of what we can do at the moment. The mage leader's voice was slightly regretful. He shook his head helplessly. He reported to Kant, "My lord, if we can have more sun disks, we might be able to make this sun disk stronger. Moreover, we speculate that the current power of this sun disk is not only that. When it absorbs enough of the same type of strange objects, it will develop even more power." That's simple. Kant nodded. The smile on his face proved that he was happy. After some thought, he said, "Oasis Lookout still has a sun disk, and if I remember correctly, we didn't search through the entire underground city in the karst cave. We haven't cleaned up the temple too." 7 mages agreed. That temple indeed seemed to have positive energy gathering. Their senses were not bad. At that time, these 7 mages were the mage apprentices who had followed the army to the underground city. For this, after experiencing a battle, they were successfully promoted to mages. With the powerful magic power of the Unfoth Empire, along with the other elite troops, they were able to deal with the abyssal demon trapped within the underground city walls. At that time, Kant's main force was still in Trondheim Castle. The troops also did not have high-level combat strength. Even mages were still mage apprentices at that time. Moreover, there was not extraordinary knights, who were very strong in melee combat, in Kant's troop at that time. They only appeared after defeating the demons. That could be considered Kant's blessed land. Now, there was also a passage that led to the Resnistican River. This deepened Kant's good impression of the ancient passage and the underground city of the Karst Cave. Especially, in the underground city's temple ruins, there might still be some strange objects that was the same type as the sun disk. If these strange items were found, Kant could upgrade the current sun disk. Kant decided in his heart. Quickly prepare, we're heading to the underground city. Kant ordered. The mages said in astonishment, "My lord, we're heading there now." Kant nodded. That's right. The mages looked troubled. They had not rested well last night. However, Kant added, "You don't need to follow. Stay here and continue to study extraordinary powers. I will lead the Lion Knights and Boonduck to the underground city of the Karst Cave with me." Understood, the mages heaved a sigh of relief. As spellcasters, their physical strength could not be compared to that of extraordinary knights. In fact, their physiques were similar to that of ordinary people. Although they had been nourished by magic elements and their physiques had been indirectly improved, they had spent years studying magic and working like a scholar. They did not deliberately train their bodies like knights and warriors. In fact, their physiques were equivalent to that of healthy adults. It was obviously unrealistic for them to go through painstaking physical training of knights and warriors. Kant also understood this point. Therefore, he did not intend to let them follow him on this mission. In fact, there was no need for the mages to follow him. The danger in the underground city of the Karst Cave had already been resolved. Even if there were some demonized creatures or demons remained in the underground city, they would not be a match for the Sarandian horsemen who possessed extraordinary powers. An ordinary level 4 Sarandian horseman would be able to take down more than 10 imps. They would be able to work together with the powerful level 5 heavy cavalry, Mamluk, to deal with the strong and reckless long-horned demon. Moreover, Kant already had level 6 extraordinary knights in his troop. As long as they did not encounter that terrifying abyssal demon, which in Kant's eyes had the power of a level 8 troop class, they would be able to sweep through anything they encountered. Even if they encountered an undefeatable enemy, they would still be able to escort Kant away. 10 Sarlian Lion Knights were enough to dominate the local area. Before leaving, Kant had made some arrangements. When they arrived at the council hall on the first floor, James and Boonduck were also rushed over there once they received the mission. "Lord Kant." The two of them bowed respectfully. "Yes." Kant nodded and very straightforwardly made arrangements for the two of them. "Boonduck, follow me to the underground city. I think you should be familiar with that place. After all, we have been there before." "Understood," Boonduck answered. Kant looked at James. "I have a very important mission for you. Please speak." James stood solemnly. "I plan to level up the town." Kant frowned slightly and spoke out the decision in his heart: the town will be upgraded to a city. During this period of time, I want you to carry out the city construction. Try to fill this mountain peak with the buildings that we should have. I will do my best." James did not decline. "Very good." Kant nodded. The current situation continued to change. The Aran town, which was originally a secret sanctuary of Kant and his people, was also no longer safe. After all, the ancient passage had been opened. The people from the outside world could enter the ancient passage at any time through the gap, thus discovering Kant's hidden forces. Therefore, one of the goals was to seize the opportunity and head to the underground city of the Karst Cave to search for the sun disk. Moreover, an investigation at the gap in the Resnistican River was also the goal. Chapter 324, level up of Aran City. However, before completing these objectives, he had to deal with the current affairs of the local government. For instance, the leveling up of a city. Moreover, Kant had already stored enough honor points. According to the rules of the system, 10 honor points enabled a village to become a stronghold or a town. With the addition of another 100 honor points, a stronghold could thereafter become a castle while a town would become a city. Now that Kant had 100 honor points, it was enough for him to raise Aran from a town into a city. It was a must. There were too many uncertainties in the lottery. Even if there were a lot of good things he could draw from the lottery, Kant did not dare allow himself even a moment of reprieve. He was keenly aware that he was treading a fine line. One misstep and he would plunge into the abyss. He truly was walking on thin ice. Kant intended to speed up the development of Aran and increase the level of safety in the future. This was all part of a strategic plan of his. In this world, Kant, who was alone, did not have any allies to speak of. He could only rely on himself, his efforts and his prudence, to ensure he would not make mistakes. Only then would he have sufficient clout to forge himself a path slowly but steadily. Therefore, he chose to raise the level of his town. Ding system prompt. Aran town will consume 100 honor points to level up into a city. Yes/no level up? A dialog box flicked into existence awaiting his choice. Level up. Kant decided almost immediately. He chose to raise the level of his town. Following his confirmation, a tremendous flux of data swirled around him. A mysterious power infused with the laws of the world descended from the sky and enveloped the mountain's peak. With Kant as the center, a brilliant transformation enveloped the town. Streams of data fell like the torrential rains and soon the entire mountain peak was bathed in its glow. It was a spectacular scene. However, only Kant himself could see it. Such was the power of laws. Not even the Lion Knight, James, Boonduck, or the mage standing by their side could detect it. In their eyes, regardless of the changes that occurred to the town, it was but a matter of fact. It was simply another miracle performed by Supreme Lord Kant. As such, they were not surprised and only a certain admiration lingered in their hearts. Ding level up complete. A system notification echoed in his mind. The data streams that filled the mountains and plains gradually disappeared. It was not long before the changes in the surroundings stabilized. When Kant turned his head to look around, the town-level council hall that was originally built from stone and wood had already undergone an obvious change. Kant sized it up from the inside. The exquisite decor filling the interior was nothing short of luxurious, and the sight of which made his eyebrows rise in amazement. Not bad. This was the governor's official residence. Although it did not have the same defensive capabilities as a castle, it was certainly more comfortable to live in. The city-level council hall was supposed to be an official residence. It was where the governor and his or her officials lived and worked. It was thought that living and working in the same environment would facilitate both the coordination and operation of the entire city, thereby ensuring excellence in the city's development. Even military operations were decided from the governor's official residence. Though, it was mostly for the purposes of self-defense. A city is different from a castle. It is the foundation of any military. It is a melting pot of culture, industry, agriculture, commerce, and many other industries, providing all kinds of resources and support to the forces they belong to. It was the backbone of the blood-making machine of the entire force, the source of victory. Aran. Generals, James, Boonduck. Type, Boonduck City. Current population, 1,500. Current army, 517. Comment, Aran is a newly established city. Its situation appears rather precarious at the moment. The city is too simple. Not only is its agricultural development lacking, but it also shows weakness in the fields of animal husbandry and fishing. It is a city that might have bright future prospects, though the specifics of which would depend on its further development. A brief report made by the system, of the city's current status, flashed across Kant's eyes. Presently, not all of the buildings in the city had been completely constructed. Nonetheless, this would not impede the city's ability to upgrade itself. So long as he continued to raise the city's level, it would eventually reach a point where further upgrades would become possible. As for whatever had been left unbuilt, Kant decided to leave it up to Dinar. There was no need for him to do the rest in person. James had it all well in hand. Kant placed great importance on this general who was a doctor by profession. As a general hailing from the continent of Karadia, James was a highly competent individual whose worth extended beyond the field of medicine. Having journeyed across the lands, he had accumulated a vast store of knowledge and honed his skills through all sorts of trials and tribulations. His strength was unquestionable. James. After organizing his thoughts on the matter, Kant assigned, "You will be in charge of housing and infrastructure in the city." "Yes." James listened respectfully and solemnly. "At the same time, you also have my permission to build and develop the industries of agriculture, animal husbandry, fishing, and handicrafts. As long as you deem it feasible, you may develop the hills around the city in any manner you see fit, such that it would give effect to this directive I am issuing you with." Kant said this all in a deep voice, "But remember to be careful." "I understand." James nodded in affirmation of the task he had been entrusted with, responding in a deep and solemn voice. The city's construction could not be handled carelessly. The thousands of acres of land on the mountaintop was the bedrock of the newly established city. Though it may have seemed vast, it was a finite resource that would quickly be exhausted if mishandled. Residential housing was first and foremost on their agenda. There had to be enough living space for people to ensure that the city could accommodate a rapid increase in its population. With the city's development geared towards agriculture and handicrafts, sufficient housing for a growing population was made all the more important. Such labor-intensive industries relied on the support of the population. Of course, with the backing of the continent of Karadia, Kant did not need to worry about the source of the city's population. As long as there were sufficient houses, refugees who could not survive in the continent of Karadia would flock towards his city in an endless stream, bringing with them the skills and tools of the trade his city was in dire need of. While Castle Trondheim would stand as the seat of military politics, Arran City would shoulder the heavy responsibility of developing its industries in the fields of farming, animal husbandry, and handicraft making. Kant believed that James could handle the expansion of these various industries well. After all, it is much easier to build a brand new city than it is to rebuild and refurbish an old city. Even if James was incapable of transforming a city overnight, it would not be a problem for him to lead this new city into an era of prosperity. That's all. Kant dismissed James upon finalizing his arrangements. During this process, Boonduck had already marshaled his troops. This time, he would be accompanying them to the ancient passage. As the general who would be accompanying him this time, Boonduck had taken stock and prepared all the necessary provisions for their upcoming expedition. These supplies included food and water, some firewood, a load of high-quality carbon, as well as a large number of torches. Ahead of their departure, Boonduck had deployed 10 desert bandits on reconnaissance. They rode light, carrying just a week's worth of supplies. It was not a good idea to bring along too many troops. They would hinder more than help in the old tunnels winding into the depths of the ancient passage. Besides, the distance between the ancient passageway and the city was negligible. They would not need much time to travel back and forth for their supplies. Even if they were stationed there to search for the sun disk that might appear in the ruins, it would not take too much time. After all, the Lion Knights of Sarian possessed extraordinary powers. Although they did not completely understand what positive energy and negative energy were, it did not change the fact that, as an elite company of knights from the Pandey continent's age of chaos, they still retained their spiritual perception. In this way, the time needed to search for the sun disk was shortened. After all, their spiritual perception allowed them to sense the positive energy contained in the sun disk and thereby presenting them with the opportunity to excavate it post-haste. It was practically the equivalent of a positioning system. Chapter 325, Black Fog. Kant led the team forward. They were light-armored and rode at an extremely fast speed. The surface of the ancient passage was originally paved with large and neat stones. In addition to the statue of the ancient warrior on the stone wall, their eyes were emitting a faint golden light, barely illuminating the passage. Although the light was still dim, they could still barely see in the passage. In an environment where one could see, the warhorse galloped quickly. They did not have much rest along the way. After a short break and eating some bread and dried meat, it continued to make the best use of its time to travel. After close to 6 hours, they arrived at the entrance of the underground city of the Karst Cave. With the faint light from the moss and fluorescent mushrooms, the light in the entire ancient passage became more abundant and brighter. However, what was more remarkable was the golden light that appeared in the entire underground city of the Karst Cave. Kant led his team into the underground city. On the rock layer above their heads, the golden light rays pervaded the air. Looking from the ground, the inside of the Karst Cave seemed to be at the intersection of day and night. The dim yellow sunlight and the gentle moonlight mixed together, making the inner part of the underground city of the Karst Cave seem more strangeness and mysterious. "We're here." Kant gently knocked on the horse's belly and urged the horse forward. After passing through the ancient passage, he led the team into the Karst Cave. It was still a spacious and flat stone square. Faint light moss and fluorescent mushrooms grew in the gaps between the stones. On the rock layer above their heads, a golden pillar of light was like the light of dusk. The entire pillar of light filled the rock wall like a mysterious array pattern, bringing a dim yellow light to the Karst Cave below. The horses were running on the neat stone slabs. The desert bandits pulled out their scimitars with a cautious expression. Even their breathing was a little hurried. The environment here was harsh. The word harsh did not refer to the harsh natural conditions of the desert mountains. Instead, it referred to the psychological impact that the ghastly underground city brought to their vision. It was especially harsh. In fact, their cautiousness was not without reason. The square was still littered with remains, which had already rotted to the point where only bones remained. One could vaguely see that those were the demons that had been killed before. For example, the imps holding pitchforks and those huge long-horned demons had almost rotted to the point where they had turned into a disgusting pool of pus-like, blood-like objects, which looked even more terrifying. It was not a corpse that could be formed by humans or normal creatures. It wasn't cleaned properly at that time. Boonduck frowned slightly. "We were too careless. Supposedly, these demon corpses that had been killed should be piled up and burn them into ashes. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been good if they had allowed to rot naturally, which may cause a plague and pollute the water source." Kant frowned at this. "We left too quickly at that time and didn't have time to clean up the battlefield. We'll have to deal with it again after the mission is over," Boonduck said seriously, "if we plan to reopen this underground city." You're right." Kant nodded. The reason why they hadn't cleaned up the battlefield at that time was also because the battle had ended. They had neglected this cleaning task with the thought that they wouldn't continue to come here. Now that they were back, they would definitely have to pay the price for their carelessness back then. It was even more troublesome and disgusting to deal with these half-rotten corpses. But they had to be dealt with. Boonduck turned his head and waved at the desert bandits, ordering them directly, "I'll leave it to you guys to deal with it." "Yes," the desert bandits answered. However, there was a helpless and bitter smile on their faces. They were the only low troop class. Whether it was in terms of combat strength or personal status, the desert bandits could not compare to the Sarlian Lion Knights next to them. They understood that their purpose of coming here was to deal with these matters, to do some chores, handle some difficult small problems, or scout the path. As for the battle, that was the job of the Sarlian Lion Knights. However, when they were close to the ruins of the city wall, the Lion Knights surrounding the guards slowly tightened the reins and controlled the war horses under them to stop moving forward. Their eyes stared to the front through the eyeholes of the full-plate helmet. "Wait," they noticed something unusual and raised their hands at the same time to signal for everyone to stop moving forward. What did you find? Kant frowned. In front of them, the ruins of the city wall still looked like it had been destroyed. They could still see the magic effects caused by the fatal frost and the summoning of lightning, such as the frost that had not dispersed from the cracks in the stone, and the dark marks caused by the lightning that struck the city wall. Kant was slightly stunned. Extraordinary power spread throughout his body and finally released a faint golden light. Negative energy. Boonduck spoke at this time, if I'm not wrong. Evil Aura, the Lion Knights spoke. Their expressions became more solemn. They pulled out the night swords at their waists and said in a serious voice, "My lord, please pay attention. I can feel the power of the underworld." "Yes." Kant nodded slowly. "I can feel it too." As they approached the ruins of the city wall, wisps of soft mist fog that could not be detected without careful inspection appeared around them. They were even like little loaches, trying to seep into their mouth, nose, ears, and even their skin and pores. "Evil," the Sarlian Lion Knights snorted coldly. They used their extraordinary powers, and blood-red flames burst forth from their bodies. The blood-red lion, which seemed to be baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, immediately shattered the black fog that was trying to approach them. It was not just them. The surrounding desert bandits were also attacked by the soft and gentle black fog. However, faced with the black fog, these ordinary desert bandits did not have any means of resistance. Each of them was actually riding on their desert horses, shaking their heads, and their faces were red, as if they were drunk and about to lose their minds. The situation was very strange. If the mages were here, they might be able to determine what was happening here. However, they did not follow the team. "Come to me." Kant tightened his grip on the sword of the king by his waist and said in a deep voice, "By my side." As he said this, a majestic golden light spread out, and there was a milky white halo in it. It automatically formed a domain that covered an area of 50 square meters, expelling the soft and gentle black fog. Divine domain, any injury within the domain can speed up its recovery. At the same time, it had a hidden function. Dispel evil. If Kant used his full power to activate his divine domain, it could cover 500 square meters of space. But now, protecting these 10 desert bandits, who did not have extraordinary powers and were equivalent to ordinary people, was not a problem. Even the 10 Lion Knights and Boonduck at the edge of the area were covered. Wait, the black fog was dispelled. Boonduck shook his head slightly and looked at the golden domain that was glowing with white light with some surprise. His face seemed to be a little embarrassed and awkward. "Here, I actually feel a little uncomfortable inside here." Chapter 326, Apostle of the Underworld. "This is really uncomfortable." Boonduck had a painful expression on his face. Kant, who was under the protection of the inner side, narrowed his eyes. He had already seen Boonduck's uneasiness. He could not help but frown and ask, "Boonduck, how is your situation?" "It's a little uncomfortable." Boonduck frowned and said softly, "It's like being roasted in a blacksmith's shop." Kant frowned. He looked at Boonduck's restless appearance as he bathed in the divine domain. With a thought, he withdrew the divine domain beside him, exposing him to the black fog that was spreading in the outside world. However, Boonduck's entire body was wrapped in the black fog. There was no negative effect to him. Instead, it was like he was in a comfortable environment. He took a deep breath, causing the black fog to wrap around his entire body even more tightly. He shouted in a relaxed manner, "Lord Kant, I feel very comfortable." As expected. Kant narrowed his eyes. The thought in his heart had already been confirmed. Beside him, the Sarlian Lion Knights frowned. The faces under the masks were very shocked. Some of them even rode their horses to Kant's side. They reported softly, "My lord, the appearance of Boonduck seemed to be affected by the power of the underworld. Perhaps he has fallen." "Fallen?" Kant stared at Boonduck, who was sitting on a horse in front of him, with his arms open as if he was bathing. "Yes, if we don't deal with him in time, he will become a fallen knight." The Lion Knights nodded. As members of the strongest national knights in the kingdom of Sarleon, they were naturally well informed. The Pendor continent was not without danger. The demons of the underworld always wanted to invade this world and plunder the souls of all living beings. Some of the people with low moral character, corrupted morals, or tempted by evil forces would be corrupted into fallen knights and become the lackeys of the underworld. They would slaughter wantonly to welcome the invaders of the underworld and spread fear. These Lion Knights had even dealt with similar people in the kingdom of Sarleon. Kant knew this very well. After all, this was the setting of the game, and he knew the inside story very well. Wait. Kant shook his head and did not give any orders. He could sense that Boonduck was still loyal to him. This was a loyalty that came from the soul, from the level of the rules. Even if the black fog wrapped around Boonduck, causing a dangerous aura to appear all over his body, his loyalty to Kant could not be changed. This was because the power of the black fog was not enough to change the rules. However, the Lion Knights held their knight swords tightly and rode their horses in front of Kant to protect him. They looked at Boonduck solemnly. Even the desert bandits felt that something was wrong. They all shrunk their heads and pulled out their scimitars and spears nervously. They gripped their reins tightly and rode their horses. The thin black fog became thicker and thicker. It even extended out like long tentacles. It coiled around Boonduck. An evil aura filled the air, and Boonduck's voice was slightly hoarse. His breathing became extremely heavy, as if he had undergone a metamorphosis. This powerful power! Boonduck roared. His entire body was filled with black fog, and it surged into his body. The evil aura circulated, and the warhorse under him was enveloped by the black fog as well. It also let out a beast-like roar, making the underground city walls of the karst cave become even stranger and more terrifying. However, at this moment, a dialogue box suddenly appeared in Kant's vision. Ding side quest issued. Side quest, Fallen. Reward, Oath of the Underworld. Introduction, evil is circulating, evil is growing, his past character is declining, his pride and honor is fading. Choose the person who has been infused with the evil aura, and let him believe in the power of the underworld. Side quest from the system. However, Kant's eyes flashed, and he directly chose Boonduck. It's him. The data stream instantly appeared in the void. Like a chain, it instantly restrained Boonduck, who was roaring, including the warhorse beneath him. The roaring continued, and the black fog around Boonduck and the warhorse became denser, as if they had been stimulated even more intensely. Their entire bodies began to struggle, trying their best to get rid of the data chain all over their bodies. However, from the level of rules, it could be seen as the system data was formed from the gathering of countless worlds. How could the individual strength of a mere Boonduck and the warhorse be able to shake it? If it were the gods of this world, it would be more like it. The data chain instantly engulfed the black fog and Boonduck, and a large amount of data streams instantly poured in. In front of Kant, the Sarleon Lion Knights raised their kite-shaped shields. Each of them gritted their teeth and guarded in front. However, no matter how the black fog scattered in all directions and tried to attack or escape, it was unable to escape the encirclement of the layers of data streams. Soon, the data streams and data chain had locked the black fog into the bodies of Boonduck and the warhorse. Ding! After your tireless efforts, the temporary side quest has been completed. Temporary side quest, Fallen completed. Reward, Oath of the Underworld. Introduction, Boonduck was lured by evil and obtained the power from the underworld. At this time, he is no longer the captain of the crossbowmen. Instead, he has transformed into an intruder of the underworld and become the spokesperson of the underworld in this world. The data stream disappeared. The black fog also disappeared. Boonduck was riding on his warhorse. He lowered his head and seemed to be deep in thought. The Lion Knights around him had a drastic change in expression. They gritted their teeth in anger and said, "My lord, he has completely fallen. He has become the lackey of the underworld." He is an intruder of the underworld against the Pendor continent. He is an enemy. No, I am the lackey of Lord Kant. I am an apostle sent by the underworld to serve Lord Kant. However, a voice with objection appeared. The voice was hoarse and deep. Boonduck slowly raised his head and turned his horse around. His ruby-like eyes were sparkling. He bowed respectfully to Kant and said, "No matter what, you are the supreme lord that I admire greatly and have chosen to serve." Following Boonduck's words, a dialog box popped up in Kant's eyes. Ding system prompt. Congratulations, your General Boonduck has absorbed the power of the underworld and obtained a transformation. The captain of the crossbowmen, Boonduck, has indeed transformed into the underworld apostle Boonduck. Boonduck, underworld apostle, obtained the power of the underworld and has chosen to serve Kant as a loyal general. Special Effect 1, the gift of the underworld, increases physical fitness by 200% and ignores all negative buffs and diseases. Special Effect 2, plunder from the underworld, kill enemies and absorb their souls to replenish vitality and recover injuries. Special Effect 3, invasion from the underworld, open the void gate once a day and summon one team of underworld intruders. An extremely detailed data appeared on the dialog box. Kant slightly raised his eyebrows and looked at Boonduck, who bowed his head respectfully. The corners of his mouth curled up. "Very good, Boonduck. Your strength is exactly what I need." Chapter 327, The Conflict of Pendor Continent. Kant was extremely satisfied. The power of Boonduck could no longer be measured by ordinary generals. Boonduck, who had already mastered the power of the underworld and had become an extraordinary general, was far stronger than his past self and Rolf in combat. He was also stronger than Manad and James as supporting generals. It could be said that the current Boonduck was the #1 general. How could Kant not be satisfied? The power itself did not represent either good or evil. Only what one did after yielding the power mattered. Moreover, only children cared about right and wrong. Kant, as a politician, as a ruler, as the overlord who was about to rise up, only cared about whether this power could be used by him, whether it could bring benefits to him, and bring about beneficial changes. Kant reached out and patted the Sarlian lion knights who were surrounding Boonduck as if they were guarding against him. He said in a serious voice, "I don't care whether it's the power of the underworld or not, I only know that Boonduck is a general who has chosen to be loyal to me. Let your grudges be put aside for the time being in this world. I don't want any conflicts between both sides." "Yes," the Sarlian lion knights replied. However, the blood-red flames all over their bodies were still faintly waiting to be unleashed. They were like hidden lions, constantly on guard against Boonduck, whose body was emitting black smoke like he was possessed by a demon. The people of the Pendor continent hated the underworld, and they hated it even more. The human world and the underworld had an irreconcilable conflict. Other than those human traitors who willingly fell into the underworld and willingly became the underworld's lackeys, everyone else was deeply wary of these underworld demons that were hidden in various parts of the world or in the inner layer of the world. It must be known that the fallen knights that appeared on the Pendor continent and the heretic worshippers who believed in the underworld would carry out bloody sacrifices from time to time. They would kill innocent civilians, rob the noble families and merchants in order to open the gates of the underworld, letting the demons of the underworld invaded and ruled the continent of Pendor. Ha! The kingdom of Sarlian, a country built on the ruins of the Pendor Empire, a hypocritical ruler, a vicious leader, and a schemer of conspiracies and schemes. The black fog around Boonduck's body disappeared, but his scarlet eyes were looking at the Lion Knights. He came from the continent of Karadia, but the power he accepted was the power of the demons from the underworld on the continent of Pendor. His scarlet eyes were like the purest rubies, and his slightly pale face was even more bewitching and beautiful. He curled up a slightly mocking smile. When it comes to real slaughter and conspiracy, what's the difference between the kingdom of Sarlian and the underworld? Shut up! Filthy degenerates! The Sarlian lion knights shouted angrily, and the night swords in their hands were all aimed at Boonduck. The atmosphere was very intense. The conflict between the two had reached a point where it could not be resolved. If Kant was not here, these valiant Sarlian Lion Knights would have launched a fearless charge. Even if they knew that they were no longer a match for Boonduck, they would not hesitate to sacrifice themselves and fight. However, Kant slowly raised his hand and signaled them, "Quiet." Both sides fell silent. Kant's supreme authority was irreplaceable. Boonduck said respectfully to Kant, "I am the symbol of the Underworld's loyalty to you. I will not betray you, I will not give up, I will follow you forever." "I understand." Kant nodded. But he still warned both parties, "I don't want to see you arguing again." "Yes." Both parties nodded. Although the atmosphere was still stiff, at least it was not as tense as before. The 10 desert bandits scratched their heads. Looking at the strange atmosphere, they consciously turned their heads to the side. To them, the current level of conflict was not something they could participate in. Kant asked, "Boonduck, can you sense the things inside?" "Yes." Boonduck immediately nodded respectfully. The black fog around his body disappeared, and his scarlet eyes returned to normal. There was only a hint of red in them. "Inside is the corpse of the abyssal demon, but only its bones are left." "Yes." Kant nodded. "Are there any other dangers?" "No," Boonduck replied, "there are no living creatures left in this underground city, including the demons." "Very good," Kant said. "The last time we came, we had swept through the area, but I still felt a bit of divine power was left, and there's also the power of the undead. It's really amazing." Boonduck said, "Now, these powers are almost on the verge of disappearing." He paused, then he frowned and said, "That's not right. That divine power hasn't completely disappeared. Recently, it seems to have received a power of the same origin to recharge, and it's still barely holding on. If I'm not wrong, it should be the sun disk that we're looking for." Kant immediately asked, "Very good, can you sense where it is?" "There." Boonduck reached out his hand and pointed at the temple. "Let's go." Kant did not waste time and immediately got off his horse, leading the team forward. The Sarlian Lion Knights immediately dismounted and followed on foot, but they also deliberately kept a distance from Boonduck, who was next to them. The eyes of both sides crossed, with vigilance, mutual distrust, and hidden deep hatred. In response, Boonduck snorted coldly, waved his hand and said, "Desert bandits, stay behind to watch the horses. There is no use for you to go." "Yes, yes," the desert bandits quickly responded. Although the Lion Knights could be hostile to Boonduck, the desert bandits were originally the bottom-level cavalry of the continent of Karadia. They were also the cavalry directly under Boonduck's command. They had no reason to reject this general's orders. Military orders were like mountains. Since they had become Kant's cavalries and were under Boonduck's command, they could only obey. The black fog here had been completely absorbed by Boonduck. There was no danger. Kant was also at ease to let these desert bandits watch the horses here. He only led Boonduck and the 10 Sarlian Lion Knights into the ruins of the city wall with quick steps. Looking at the huge, eerie, and terrifying demon skeleton, without a single bit of flesh and blood on its body, he felt a little emotional. This terrifying abyssal demon had once caused Kant and the others to suffer a lot. If it was not for the fact that the seal of this underground city was still there, Kant might have been completely annihilated at that time. The huge body that was more than 10 meters tall, the terrifying weight that weighed several tons, as well as the extraordinary spell, the broken rune sword that was broken but still fatal, were all powerful sources of combat strength that could destroy ordinary troops. Those that could be compared to them might be the high-end combat power of the Unfoth Empire, the Titans. But it was safe now. They passed through the skeleton-like corpse. They walked along the once desolate and damaged Central Avenue and directly walked towards the center of the underground city, towards the temple. A faint golden light appeared at the top of the temple. Chapter 328, The Spirit That Still Existed. It was the sun disk. It appeared at the top of the temple's eaves, revealing half of it, and emitting a sacred golden light. Kant looked over. The sun disk at the top of the temple should have been supported by a stone statue, but for various reasons, the stone statue cracked and even the golden disk collapsed on the roof. If they had not come back again, they would have missed this sun disk. The group quickly approached the temple. The traces of their footsteps back then were still vivid in their minds. Time had not passed that long. Reaching the triangular temple was like the Mayan pyramids. Other than the hall at the top, there were stone stairs at the bottom. They walked up the stairs and finally came to the stone door of the hall again. It was still open, pitch black, as if darkness was gathering in it. However, it was not completely dark. A faint golden light emerged from the depths. Kant frowned slightly. In the alley 10 meters away, the hall of the temple was full of bones. However, the half-closed door now had light glowing inside it. Moreover, it was very bright, as if hundreds of candlesticks were lit at the same time. There is a special energy fluctuation inside. Boonduck reminded him, it's a little strange, but it's already very weak. It can't pose a threat. Can you differentiate it clearly? Kant frowned and asked. No. Boonduck hesitated for a moment, but after sensing it seriously, he still shook his head apologetically. My perception can't compare to those mages. This is my weakness. I'm very sorry about this. It's okay. We'll know once we go in and take a look. Kant wasn't angry. This was the truth. Although the Pendor continent belonged to the world with low magic, the magic in Pendor was declined even worse than this world. But it was still able to give birth to grand knights with extraordinary powers, elves who were still struggling to survive in the dark, and the underworld, which could only invade the continent in small groups. This was enough to prove the Pendor continent's past glory. It was no worse than the world Kant had transmigrated to. There was nothing to fear. Holding the sword of King in his hand, Kant took the lead and entered the alley. The 2 lion knights on the side were even faster. They walked in front of Kant, held their shields and swords, and opened the door in front of them, completely releasing the light in the hall. Hwalala! In the golden light, intense applause sounded. The 2 lion knights, Kant, and the others entered the hall together. They saw that in the brightly lit hall, a man and woman dressed in bright clothes were enthusiastically turning their heads to look at them. They were clapping their hands with all their might, and there were bright smiles on their faces. Noble, priests, soldiers, artisans, and all sorts of men, women, and children. Welcome back. At the end of the hall, on the steps, an old man with white hair and a beard was standing on the spot. He was dressed in luxurious clothes made of gold and platinum. He held a scepter made of gold and gemstones in his hand. He looked at Kant kindly and nodded gently. My heir, have you completed my mission? Kant remained silent. He stood in front of the door and looked at the people in front of him. He frowned. The lion knights beside him had cold expressions on their faces. They had already pulled out a small part of their swords. Even Boonduck's body was covered in black fog. A demonic shadow appeared behind him. It whistled through the air with a sinister and terrifying aura. It swept through the golden light in the surroundings. It was as if both sides were in a stalemate and were fighting against each other. The situation was not right. This was already extremely strange. No one let their guard down. Oh! Kant looked at the old man in front of him and said playfully, aren't you dead? He looked at the people in front of him who were looking at him fervently. His tone was merciless. Aren't all of you dead as well? Haven't you all turned into white bones? Whoosh, 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 whoosh. A gust of violent wind blew in the void. The faces that were originally eager and smiling suddenly froze. A strange expression appeared in everyone's eyes. A hatred and resentment toward the living instantly appeared, but what was even more vicious was the gradually hideous face, as well as the whimpering. The temperature instantly dropped. The originally gorgeous and bright faces of the people were already distorted. However, the resentment was not directed at Kant. It was directed at the high platform, the old man who was leaning on the scepter, dressed in luxurious clothes, and had a golden crown on his head. There was a faint mocking smile at the corner of Kant's mouth. He looked at the people on both sides who had tears of blood flowing out of their eyes. He shook his head and said, "It seems that their hatred towards you far exceeds their hatred towards the living. There's nothing I can do about it. This is my fault. After so long, they still can't forget it." The old man calmly raised his scepter. As the golden light flashed, the originally well-dressed women and children in the hall were instantly shattered into piles of white bones. They fell onto the floor of the entire hall. Their obsession is very strong. Kant was expressionless. He did not feel uncomfortable with the bones that fell on the floor. The entire hall immediately became quiet again. There was a sacred golden light shining, but in front of him was only the old man at the end of the hall and Kant and the others at the door. The scene was slightly quiet, but Kant walked forward. The two extraordinary powers in his body were already on guard. He looked straight at the old man and said calmly, "Your Holiness, I didn't expect you to still exist." "I didn't expect it either." The old man nodded and said calmly, "It's just that previously, I felt the divine power of the sun god." "Oh." Kant nodded. "Interesting." The old man was the one Kant had met back then. He had transformed from a lich into a spirit body. He was the Pope of the Sun God sect, who had already disappeared in history and only had a spirit body left. The old Pope did not care about Kant's rudeness. He already understood the cause and effect. In fact, he was still alive, which was a blasphemy against the Sun God. He was the most serious traitor. If it were in the era of the ancient gods, he would be punished, and his soul would have been burned on the divine fire for 100 years. The old Pope sighed slightly. Looking at Kant's calm appearance, he leaned on the scepter that he had transformed into with golden light. He asked, "Human, have you gone to the holy city of gold and found the holy maiden of the sun in the coffin of eternity? She is the direct bloodline of the sun god. If you find her, you can marry her and obtain the great power of the sun god." "Oh, the holy maiden of the sun? I don't understand." Kant said calmly, "I found a golden coffin in the passage outside. There is a woman inside and a sealed female succubus beside it." The old Pope was slightly stunned. "Is that so? She has also fallen." He nodded. He sighed. In ancient times, the war between the gods and demons lasted until both sides were at the end of their lives. You humans and other races joined forces and began to attack us, the descendants of the gods. In the end, because the gods and demons did not trust each other, they were both exterminated. "What does it matter?" Kant asked. "Nothing." The old Pope shook his head and smiled bitterly. "That was the backup item for the coffin of eternity that I prepared. I just let my daughter lie in it." After a pause, the old Pope looked at Kant. "Is she okay?" "She was killed by me, and that female succubus." Kant said calmly, "She died very quickly. She did not feel any pain." Chapter 329, Threats to the Old Pope. As soon as Kant finished speaking, the atmosphere instantly stiffened. The golden light around the old Pope's body trembled slightly. He rubbed the scepter in his hand and stared into Kant's eyes. His voice trembled slightly. Is that so?" "Yes, that's right," Kant said calmly. "I didn't know that she was your daughter. I'm sorry for that." The old Pope was speechless for a moment. The atmosphere in the hall was even more strange. However, Kant just stood there quietly and didn't say anything. The Lion Knights and Boonduck were also staring at the old Pope in front of them. Any unusual situation would cause them to react. In fact, in their perception, the old Pope that had already become a spirit body was very weak. Or it could be said that he was pitifully weak. He was just a mere spiritual body. A soul that was barely formed from the convergence of positive energy. Although he was immune to conventional blades and swords, as long as there was any extraordinary power or elemental power struck at him, it would be able to severely injure this kind of spiritual body. He was nothing to Kant and the others. Even Kant could attack the old Pope's spiritual body as long as he activated the divine domain. So, he didn't care about this old guy at all. The glory of thousands of years ago could not make Kant fear now. In this regard, the old Pope also understood that he, who was once the greatest among the gods, had lost his former glory. Even the sun god, who had given him power and authority, had fallen, so what could he do? Looking at Kant, he could only lower his head dejectedly in the end. We should have perished in the long river of history. That's right. Kant agreed. The current era was no longer the time for these old antiques to live. Especially the Naran Desert. Since it was occupied by Kant, it was equivalent to his territory. This desert had not been claimed by anyone for thousands of years, and now these gods from the past wanted to claim it as their land again? Kant was the first to disagree. If he really gave up the hegemony of this place, then where would Kant go? Submit to the so-called gods? What a joke! That was truly living a life worse than death. That was why he was so undisguised and extremely arrogant towards this old Pope. Kant had the confidence and the strength. It also represented his attitude. Kant looked at the old Pope in front of him and said calmly, "I came here this time to obtain some sun discs. Oh, it's the golden disc above my head. It seems to be very precious." Sun disc. The old Pope's expression was calm. It's a sacred object of the Sun God sect. It carries the will of the Sun God. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Kant nodded. Kant looked up at the old Pope whose hair and beard were all white. He asked, "How many more are there in this underground city? If you don't mind, I need them all." "You shouldn't mind. In ancient times, only the high-ranking clergy of the Sun God sect had the right to touch the sun disk." The old Pope said calmly, "Unless you are a believer of my God. Otherwise, if you touch the sun disk, you will be directly turned into charcoal by the supreme power contained in it, and even your soul will be destroyed." "I don't need your concern," Kant said, "I only need the sun disk." Okay, the old Pope lowered his head in silence. There was a slight stalemate between the two sides. Even the Lion Knights pulled out half of their knight swords and looked coldly at the old man. The atmosphere was already filled with the quietness before a battle. But in reality, it was Kant who was threatening the old Pope. And the old Pope also understood that now that he had lost most of his power, it was impossible for him to contend against the human noble in front of him. He could not even resist and would be easily eliminated. Now, the human noble's military advantage was even stronger. The 10 extraordinary knights could even be considered mid to upper class warriors in the ancient times. Not to mention the current age of chaos. "This is blasphemy." The old Pope looked at Kant with a calm expression. "My faith in my God is incomparably sincere. But previously, you massacred the believers of your God and sacrificed their souls. There were old people, women, children, innocents, and sincere believers." Kant sneered. "Then you used the evil power to usurp your God's power and became the so-called divine lich. What do you mean by that?" Kant paused and shook his head. "Oh, I believe you are a sincere believer, but isn't this a blasphemy against your God, the most serious kind?" "There is a reason for it," the old Pope said with difficulty. Him. Kant nodded. And then. The old Pope closed his eyes. In the hall, the malice contained in the bones seemed to have surged towards him. The scepter in his hand released a faint golden light, dispelling the malice. In the end, the old Pope closed his eyes and sighed as if he had been appointed. "There is a solar disk at the top of the temple, and there are also 5 solar disks at the altar built by the mountain to seal the demons. This is the only 6 solar disks left in this sanctuary. Thank you for your cooperation." Kant nodded and smiled. Then I won't disturb you. Okay, the old Pope said with his eyes closed. Kant turned around and waved his hand. Let's go. The group of people intended to leave. However, just as they were thinking of leaving, Kant seemed to have thought of something. He turned around and asked the old Pope, who had his eyes closed and seemed to be immersed in the memories of the past, "Oh, there is one more thing." "What is it?" the old Pope asked. "When will you disappear?" Kant shrugged and asked, "I'm very uneasy if you stay here." "Perhaps not for long." The old Pope's tone was calm. "In half a year." Kant nodded. There was no response. He just left with the Lion Knights and Boonduck. All he needed was time. Half a year was just right within his bottom line. The solar disk was an extremely important wonder. He was more concerned about finding the solar disk that could be fused into the magic system of the Unfoth Empire and modified. If he could really fuse all 6 solar disks into it. The area that could cover by the sun disk in Trondheim Castle. 20,000 plus 30,000 square meters. A total of 50,000 square meters of coverage. This was the most ideal coverage area after absorbing 10 sun disks. 3 sun disks in Arran Town, 1 sun disk in Trondheim Castle, and 6 sun disks obtained from this underground city. As long as it was done, Trondheim Castle and a small area outside the city wall would be covered by the sun disks. Although it was still unsure whether the merged sun disk could cover the entire Oasis lookout, it was still much better than the current coverage. They left the temple, then Kant led the team to the stone wall where the buried city was located. The road was even more dilapidated. The surrounding house was also damaged. It could be predicted that when the abyssal demon broke out of the seal, it was furious with the buried city. It even used its remaining strength to destroy the empty buried city. Chapter 330, Affected Thoughts. What a pity. Kant still sighed softly. The damage was too severe. Indeed. Boonduck nodded in agreement. The outer city walls and city districts of this underground city had already been destroyed by the abyssal demons like ruins. However, compared to the inner city district, it appeared to be in relatively good condition. It wasn't that miserable. The inner city district had already been completely reduced to ruins. Be it the streets or residential areas, they had all been swept away. A large number of buildings and debris were standing in ruin. Countless craters that were caused by heavy blows were everywhere. From this, one could foresee just how furious the abyssal demons that had broken out of the seal were. Even when they were faced with an abandoned city that was completely empty, they were also filled with resentment because they still had unsettled business with the gods back then. They had also wasted what little power they had left and tried their best to destroy it. Demons would always seek for revenge, but it was rare to see such a wanton waste of their own strength. As the saying, a quarrel benefits only the third party. The gods fell from the kingdom of heaven, and the demons died in the abyss. Hence, the current world belonged to humans, at least in the Naran Desert and Sinway range. The authority and dominance of these places belonged to Kant, and no one could change it. Even the surviving gods and demons could not change it. The time had changed. The once weak humans had grasped high-end combat power. They were the masters of this era. Kant was the same. Moreover, what he grasped was not only the hegemony of this world, but also the help from the various worlds. Karadia, Pendor, the Wind of War mod, the Lord of the Rings, Light and Darkness, the Custom Commander mod, and so on. No matter which world it was, Kant could live comfortably in this world, not to mention that he had gathered all the mod worlds. How laughable it was to be enemies with so many worlds. Kant had the upper hand in conquering this world, he understood it very well. He was still striving upwards. In the process of development, even if the gods and demons returned, they would not be able to stop Kant's development, especially since he had already taken control of the Naran Desert and the Sinway range, and his force had taken shape. This underground city located in the ancient passageway was even more icing on the cake. This place could be used as a transit station. A ready-made city would be able to accommodate people if it was slightly modified. By repairing the city walls and garrisoning troops, they would be able to firmly control this city. They would also be able to control this ancient passage that led to the border between the Dukedom of Leo and the Silver Platter Kingdom, which might be located in the East County's territory, the Resnistican River. Most importantly, Kant did not need to waste his precious village quota. Even today, Kant only has one village quota. If he used this quota, who knew when he would get a new village quota next time? At present, Kant only had Oasis lookouts Trondheim Castle and the Aran City on the north side of the Seenway Range. These 2 points just separate Kant's current military and logistical requirements. If Kant intended to use the existing village quota, then he must think carefully. Military, agriculture and animal husbandry already existed. Next, perhaps it was time to develop business. The early layout and current opportunities showed that business was the crucial point. Borg, the destitute heir from the East County, now led the 10 Sarandian horsemen in the rapid development of his original trade caravan. Although there had been no contact for nearly 2 months, at least it was estimated that it was still in the process of stabilizing and developing. At least according to the plan that Borg had proposed to Kant before he left, it included stabilizing his own family. For example, the fleets that were once on the river. As long as he used Borg as a spy, Kant could easily infiltrate the East County's territory. With the help of the Borg family's fleets, he could quickly infiltrate the river and merge into this important trade river in a short period of time. After all, the ancient river passage was connected to the mouth of the Resnistican River. Kant also had the water bandits' lair. If he wanted to, he could build a village at the mouth of the river and build the water bandits' lair in the village in a short period of time. He could recruit warships and various water bandits to form his own water forces. At that time, Kant would have his own choice. At least this was an armed force. With Trondheim and Aran as backing, the new village would take shape very quickly. And the warships and water bandits recruited in the water bandits' lair would also become the 4th force that could expand at any time, in addition to the original 3 forces in the Resnistican River. The river patrol force of the Dukedom of Leo. The water bandits force with the background of the Silver Platter Kingdom. The loosely organized trade caravan force formed by merchants from various countries. Kant's strategic plan was very perfect. It could be said that it was almost perfect. As long as he finished dealing with the threat of the undead, he could put it into action at any time and grow rapidly in a short period of time. At that time, table salt and sugar from the Oasis lookout would appear on the river. This included Kant's sphere of influence. No one would have thought that this river was actually an ancient passage from the era of the gods. It could cross the shield-like Seenway Range, allowing Kant to escape from the blockade of the Naran Desert. Even the many noble families of the Dukedom of Leo, who had once again set up a blockade around the North County, would lose their effectiveness. He was in control of the Stone Pass. The control of this crucial point was equivalent to automatically excluding the noble circle of the Dukedom of Leo from entering the Naran Desert. Since they were still coveting the salt mines of Oasis Lookout and did not want Kant to return to the fertile South County, the North County, which happened to be in the middle of the two, was the best buffer. Especially Viscount Wayne's Grothin Castle and Baron Kevin's Moss Castle, they were both defensive lines. The most important thing was, the North County was Viscount Wayne's direct territory. Since the founding of the Dukedom of Leo, it had been his family's territory. Kant was not allowed to interfere. Otherwise, it was equivalent to slapping Viscount Wayne in the face and taking away his family's authority. As for Baron Kevin of Moss Castle, he was actually a spy planted in the North County by the many noble families in the South County. Just looked at the location of this castle, it was located right in the middle of the mountain range of Leo and the mountain of death that separated the 3 counties from the north and south. It was a strategic location. In order to deal with Kant, even if they were at odds with each other, as long as the noble families of the South County were still hostile towards the Naran Desert, the 2 sides would join forces because they were still within the noble circle of the Dukedom of Leo and were allies. As for the exiled Kant, in fact, he was already equivalent to someone outside of the circle. If not for the bloodline of the Grand Duke of Leo still protecting him, he would have been killed by various schemes. In fact, if Kant had not chosen the Naran Desert, this barren and dangerous wasteland as his territory, those noble families would probably not have tolerated him until now. The right to inherit the kingdom and the story of the past were the source of the noble family's hatred towards Kant. I'm really helpless. Kant shook his head and put away his thoughts. These were the thoughts in his heart. After all, his days in the dukedom of Leo were not good. Even if he had walked all the way, it was full of challenges. Other than his own hard work, there was nothing to help him. It was really tragic. However, at this moment, Boonduck suddenly opened his mouth and said, "Lord." "Hey." Kant answered with a frown. "There is still quite a bit of demonic power left here. It might affect your mood." Boonduck reminded, "You have to stabilize your mind." "Affect my mood?" Kant was slightly stunned. Unknowingly, they had already followed the damaged potholes and came to the stone wall of the inner city of the underground city. In front of them was a big hole, and the mysterious sacred sun pattern was carved on it. An indiscernible black fog moved in the surrounding air as if it was real, and even floated around Kant and the others. There was no danger. However, it reminded Kant of bad memories. This was the power left behind by demons. Although it was unknown, it could produce all kinds of negative emotions. In fact, the negative energy of the undead could also cause such negative emotions, causing people to give up on themselves and even die in all sorts of madness. The reason why the reputation of the demons and the undead was so bad was also because of this. Not to mention these evil creatures themselves, even if one were to come into contact with the items of the demons and the undead for a long time, they would become crazy and bloodthirsty. They would even become indifferent and hateful towards life, thus becoming dangerous people who were anti-human, anti-social, and anti-country. No one was willing to become such a madman. For example, the 10 lion knights beside him had heavy breathing, and their eyes were bloodshot. It was obvious that they were in a tense status. As expected, they are affected. Kant saw that they were about to draw their swords and attack each other at any moment, and he thought of something. A divine power with royal authority spread in his body, and the supernatural power instantly dispelled the fluctuation of their emotion, as well as the undetectable black fog around him. The divine domain appeared, and it enveloped the 10 lion knights. One had to be careful with one's emotions. If one's emotions were not good and one's control was not strong enough, it could turn into a life and death battle if they disliked each other. Kant understood this and treated it seriously. The divine domain was effective. The lion knights quickly regained their clarity and wore an ashamed face. "I'm sorry, my lord. We were affected just now and almost caused an irreparable result." "It's all right." Kant was calm. Boonduck consciously retreated to the periphery, deeply understanding the words of this group of lion knights. They were enemies in the Pendor continent. Of course, this fine black fog didn't have much effect on him. Instead, he was absorbing the power contained within the black fog, gathering it into the faint shadow that appeared behind him, like an abyssal demon. One could see tiny runes flickering within the abyssal demon behind Boonduck. If one were to look closely, one would be shocked to discover that those runes were actually a data chain. Or rather, it was the system's data chain that had locked the phantom image of the abyssal demon into his body, controlling this phantom image that possessed great power and turning it into the source of Boonduck's strength. "Let's see what's in front of us." Kant continued to move forward. The black fog was spreading out from the cave in front of him. It gave him the feeling that it was even more exciting than the abyssal demon he had encountered before.